Hey everybody, thank you for joining me, Kyle Webster, your host today for Photoshop for Artists. This is the fourth episode of this show. Now, today we are going to be following up on what we talked about the last time, which is an introduction to the brushes in Photoshop. Only this time we're going to be taking a look at some more advanced features of the brush settings panel, as well as some more advanced brushes, okay? And what I'm talking about specifically are the mixer brushes and the erodible tips, as well as in the features side of things, the color dynamics settings. We may also take a short look at dual brush, but getting into dual brush is something that could take up an entire episode, and I don't want to linger on it. Suffice to say that it's something that is worth noting and having a brief, or rather a surface level, understanding of. But as far as for the purposes of this course, and this specific series, getting too in-depth on how we work with dual brush and all of the many blending modes and things like that is probably not the best use of our time. So we're going to dive in and be looking here at Photoshop, and I'll just go ahead and switch over there now. And I've got some legacy brushes open here. We talked about these last time, and I just wanted to point out that if for any reason these brushes are not visible to you when you're using Photoshop or when you first open it up, if you want to access these brushes, okay, many categories here, and these are the brushes that are supposed to ship with Photoshop as sort of the defaults, if you will. If you're not seeing these, what you want to do is go over to the little drop-down menu here in the corner, and this is the menu we've pointed out in the past that allows you to access the full library of over 2,000 brushes that you can use. Now, in this same drop-down menu, you see the option to import brushes. Importing brushes means that you can bring in any ABR file. That's a standard Photoshop brush file, and one single file can contain a multitude of brushes. It doesn't have to be just one. But bringing in the files is done through this method here, import brushes. You also, depending on the version of Photoshop you are using, should be able to navigate to any ABR file in your on your hard drive or wherever it happens to be on your machine. And if you already have Photoshop open, double-clicking, okay, or opening that file should send you back to Photoshop and load those brushes for you automatically. Now, if that's not happening though, here you go, import brushes. Okay, now from here, what you want to do is navigate to your applications folder, find Photoshop, and inside there you want to find presets. And then inside there, you want to find brushes, and this is where you'll find the legacy brushes right there, okay? So I've had those loaded right here for the YouTube. See, now last time we didn't talk about the legacy brushes other than to mention that they're there, and these are including things like the basic hard round brush, soft round brush. We looked at the brush settings panel, and we looked at how to create your own brush from scratch, as well as understand what some of the settings do. If you missed that episode, don't worry. All of the Adobe Live episodes are always archived forever right here on YouTube and on Behance. So you can go back and look for Photoshop for Artists episode 3 if you want to catch up, and you'll be all set to go. All right, so now we're going to take a look first at color dynamics and what that is. Color dynamics are one of the brush settings. Remember, your brush settings panel looks like this. You have different settings you can enable. All right. Now to start off, what I'm going to do is open a brush that already takes advantage of color dynamics in order to better explain how it works. And I'm going to go into the Mega Pack. And if you remember, the Mega Pack is available again right here. The small drop-down menu. You go to Get More Brushes. That will take you to the sign-in page for the Adobe Brush Library, and there you'll find the Mega Pack. And inside the Mega Pack, there is a category called the Paint Box. And if I just scroll down a little ways here, there is a brush called Creamy right here. I'm going to select the Creamy brush, and this will help you to understand better how color dynamics work. All right, so we're going to grab a color right here, a nice orange, and I'm going to paint a little bit here with it. And what you might notice is that there's a very subtle difference in the hue, saturation, and value of every one of these brush strokes. And when I say subtle, I mean it. So if I zoom in, you should be able to see a little patterning here where you can basically make out the brush stamp itself, okay, as it is applied in these different areas of this color that I've just put down. And you can see the stamp itself as I hover over the screen. There it is. Now, what you're experiencing here is an example of color dynamics. If I open up the brush settings panel, you notice that color dynamics has a little check mark by it and it is turned on. In order for me to better show you how this works, what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the effect of what we're seeing so it's far less subtle. I'm going to take the brightness jitter and turn it up to 10. And the hue jitter I'm also going to crank up to 10. Now, when I paint with this same brush, I want you to see what happens. What you're seeing now is a far less subtle demonstration of how color dynamics are being employed with this brush. And basically what's happening is, as you know from the last class, the way a brush works is that I have a shape and I am repeatedly stamping that shape along a path as I draw, which that is what becomes basically the brush stroke. The illusion of it being a single stroke comes from the fact that the stamps themselves, as they're being put down onto the canvas, are very close to one another. That's what we call spacing. If you look here at the brush tip shape, you'll notice the spacing for this brush is set at 5%. That's a very, very low value. It means that whatever the brush stamp size is, in this case if it were 100 pixels, okay, every 5 pixels, 5% of 100, you're going to put down a new stamp. So these stamps are going to be butted up against each other, very close to one another, creating the illusion of a brush stroke, okay? Now, what I'm doing with color dynamics is I am telling Photoshop that for each one of these successive stamps, I want you to take the foreground color that I have here. In this case, you see it's this orangey color, right? You can see it over here as well. I want you to take that color and I want you to shift it by a value of 10% away from the current color I've picked. Now, if you look at a color wheel, it's easier to understand this idea. Basically, the color is going to be moving this way by 10% or that way by 10%. Okay, so here's where we're starting. So Photoshop, anywhere in this range here, 10% to the left, 10% to the right, or anything in between, okay, it's going to select colors in that range for the stamp. Then look at the brightness, same thing. I'm telling it I want to go down, right, make it darker, or up, make it lighter by a value of 10%. There's also a saturation jitter. That means I want you to pull left or right by a value of 1%, which is pretty much not even noticeable. All right, and now that is where we're getting this kind of effect. Now the cool thing about this is you'll notice that depending on the settings, you can basically get an illusion from time to time, depending on the brush stamp shape, okay, of there being kind of what we would call an impasto effect, I-M-P-A-S-T-O, Italian word for there being depth, okay, with thick paint. So height and depth information, right? Paint right out of the tube, slapped on the canvas, nice and thick. And so that's going to create that illusion here. And if I were to take the hue jitter and reduce it down to nothing, but leave the brightness jitter fairly high, maybe a value of say 8%, I'm going to be working with the same color, okay, just lightening it and darkening it a little bit with each stamp. And that will intensify that effect of impasto because it's really just creating light and shadow, which is what you would see with real paint. You're not going to see as much hue variation there. So color dynamics allow you to, with each stamp, change the hue, the saturation, and the brightness or value of whatever color you have selected as you're painting. Now there are a lot of really interesting ways to use this feature, okay? And there are also more ways for the feature to behave than what I'm showing you. But for now, we're going to just stick with this stamp-based approach so you can see what's possible. So again, let's change this maybe to like a value of 2, and we'll push this up to 12%. I want you to see what a nice effect that has. And I've combined this, okay, with transfer. If you remember what transfer is, it allows you to have the opacity of the brush mark affected by different input, okay, with the pen. In this case, I have pressure affecting the opacity. You'll see that the minimum opacity is set to 0, which means that with very, very light pressure, okay, I'm almost going to put nothing down whatsoever. Now what this means is for these chunky brush strokes, if I use full pressure and put that paint down, okay, get some really nice stuff going on here, there might be some areas where I want to soften that effect. And what makes this possible is the transfer. By using light pressure, I can glaze over an area like this and sort of soften the effect of the impasto brush strokes. Check out this area right here. You've got a nice big, what appears to be sort of a raised area of paint right there with a shadow next to it. Now I want to leave that alone. It looks cool. But in some other areas like here, where I get the visible stamping going through the brush stroke, if I feel like that's too choppy, I can do this. I'm just using very light pressure and kind of scrubbing back and forth over that direction of that brush stroke, and that is going to sort of almost blend, okay, even though we're not blending, but it gives the impression of all of those effects being lessened, okay? And by doing this, all right, you can get a lot of variety in a painted area thanks to color dynamics and thanks to having that control over transfer, or rather opacity, with your stylus. So this really is a powerful, powerful feature for taking you away from that flat, solid color that you normally associate with digital painting. Color dynamics play a big role in that. Pausing here to see if we have any questions, and saying hello to some folks who are joining us over on Behance, okay, in the live chat. If you're watching over on YouTube or elsewhere, just remember I'm following the chat over on Behance. So a quick hello to Cryo and Josie, and to Barbara from Music City. I don't know where Music City is, but that sounds cool. Gareth and Z, Marie, and Sam and Clever. RB is here, Steve is here, Umacorn is here as well. Hi, hi, hi. Hi, Rob, nice to see you. D is here. Hi, D, thanks for joining us. See if I'm gonna make sure I don't miss anybody. Clever, what's up, Clever? Leah, hi, nice to see you as well. Daniel, bonjour et ça va. Glad you're here. All right, folks, let's continue with the color dynamics lesson here. So I'm showing you currently what's possible with stamp-based color dynamics. We're only using one brush at the moment, but broaden your minds for a minute and think, well, how else could this be useful beyond a simple sort of painterly look? Okay, for which it is really quite good, as you can see. Well, one idea I have for you is spatter. Whenever you see paint spatter, one of the things that makes it really fun is to have a variety, okay, of lights and darks and a little bit of hue jitter going on there, right? So if we're going back to our brush menu here, we can check out in the 2019 Spring Collection, the Pollock brush. Of course, you can figure out this is named after Jackson Pollock. And if we take a look at that brush and stamp around with it, you'll see that it does have some variety when it comes to the opacity of the paint being put down. Some of it is a little more opaque than others, okay? However, we're not seeing a lot of other changes going on there with the color. And that's where the Pollock CD brush comes in. Now here's an interesting note. If you find that you are using any of my brushes in Photoshop, okay, from that massive brush library, including the updates, I will frequently use, okay, the initials CD in a brush. And what this stands for, now you know, is color dynamics. And so if we look at the brush settings for this brush, we'll see color dynamics are indeed employed with a hue jitter setting of 8% and brightness of 2. So now using that same color, look at the difference. subtle shifts, a little bit more into a red and a little bit more into a yellow with that same brush, okay? And so you can see that that just adds a little bit more interest to a spatter brush to make those subtle changes. Really, really useful. Bum, 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 bum. Check that out. All right, now of course, so far we've been using this in a very subtle way, but there's no reason that you have to do that. You can increase the hue jitter to 100% if you just want to fill an area with any and all kinds of colors, like so. Now to try and do this without color dynamics would take you forever, constantly switching back and forth between colors to try and lay them over, okay, one another over and over and over and over again. But here, for me to just fill in an area of my canvas with this brush using the color dynamics at this setting, this is a really easy thing to do. All right, you can imagine the many applications for this for backgrounds, okay, and for special effects, and for whatever else you happen to be doing. A lot of really interesting things you can do there. Okay, so that is pretty nice. One of the things we didn't mention last time with the settings for transfer is that you do have a opacity jitter setting as well. Now if I crank that up to 100, all right, what's nice is, in addition, okay, to having my color dynamics, I also have opacity jitter. So some of the marks I make are going to be very faint and some are going to be 100% opaque and everything in between. This gives me a whole other range of possibilities and superpowers when it comes to using the brush, okay? So you can see that even though these brushes have presets out of the box, one of the most fun things to do when you start to really understand the brush settings panel is take the brushes that are there and customize them for your own purposes. And as I demonstrated last time, if you get to a point where you have a brush that does some neat stuff and you want to hold on to that brush and keep it, you go into your brushes list here, and at the very bottom there's a little plus sign. You simply tap on that, give the brush a new name, and then once you've created that brush, you can just drag it anywhere you like up here in the list, create a new folder right here, and maybe make some favorites or whatever else you want to do. All right, now returning to color dynamics. I'm going to clear the canvas here for a second. Look and see if we have any questions. Giraffe pattern, yeah. Music City in Nashville. Nice. Steve says he taught Knopfler everything he knows. That can't be true, Steve. Oh, about snow. Yes, Z, to answer your question, that brush I was just demonstrating with is in the Spring 2019 update. Which, by the way, may have been updated to the Summer 2019 update. I don't know, because sometimes I create a set a certain season and it gets released just a few weeks later and we change the name to better suit the season. But if it's not Spring 2019, you'll find it in Summer 2019, the following season, okay? All right, so back to our settings. I'm going to now return to the Mega Pack, and I'm going to grab again the creamy brush, or in this case, the creamy variation, which is a similar brush. And what I'm going to do is, in our color dynamics, I want to demonstrate for you another fancy thing you can do that doesn't just take advantage of color dynamics per stamp. So what I'm talking about now is color dynamics per stroke. So check it out. Right here, you see apply per tip. By default, this will be turned on. However, we're going to turn it off. Now, let's go ahead and bump our hue jitter up so we make this really obvious, okay? And our brightness jitter as well. All right, now with the same kind of a color, like a sort of orange color, I'm going to make a stroke. When I do so, there is no color dynamic, okay, action going on here. But the next time I make one, look at this, and the next time, and the next time, and the next time. So now what are we doing? We are drawing per stroke. and seeing the evidence of the color dynamics employed. Okay, so why would something like this be useful? Well, now if you go back to a subtle use case, okay, like this, 2% maybe, and maybe like a 4% hue jitter. If I make strokes next to one another, okay, like so, I'm just going to occasionally get a little bit of variety there in each brush stroke as I go. And again, this is helping me avoid the look of a super flat background, okay? And because I also have the opacity, right, control here, light opacity with light pressure, etc., okay? I'm able to really go to town and make a nice chunky swatch of color here that has some good variety in it, but nothing too extreme, so that I hold on to the basic hue, saturation, and value that I wish to paint, but it's not so flat, it's not so static, okay? And you see artists do this all the time in traditional painting, and to be able to do that in a digital environment is great. It just adds a bit of vibrancy, a little bit more interest to an area. And you can, of course, again, really go to town with this. If I change the hue jitter, all right, we increase that a bit, and the saturation jitter, we increase that a bit, and then do the same thing, okay? We're gonna have some really nice variety going on here. Now, if things get too bright versus too dark, okay, reduce the brightness jitter, reduce the saturation, hue jitter just a little bit, and now give it a try. And you see it's a little more subtle, okay? But still a little bit more variety than we were last time. Really, really nice. This is great to be able to have this kind of control when you're painting. And this is, again, per stroke. So as I do this, nothing is changing other than a little bit of the opacity as I go through because of that opacity jitter setting, right? But chunky little strokes, one next to the other, all built up over one area, gives me this kind of look. Very, 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 very nice. And I encourage you to try making a painting this way. It's really, really fun. And here, if I just, so I have this color, just do it the way I'm doing it here with some chunky strokes, one next to another. Overlap, go in different directions, and just try filling an area. Just pick up the stylus a lot, and as you go, you're gonna get all this nice variety here. Okay, so let's say that I'm painting, well, an orange, okay, nothing too fancy. I just change my base color. I say, okay, I want to go a little cooler, a little darker, right here, and throw in a sort of shadow here. And remember, I have the opacity control based on pen pressure, so I'll go really light along the edges there. Look how much more interesting that is than totally flat color. What do you think? Isn't that a lot more interesting? A lot more interesting. Okay, I can use my Option key to sample an area and paint on that. Someone's opening the front door. I don't know what's going on out there. There we go. Okay, look at that. Look at this. I'm using, remember, one brush. I've only changed the color like 2 or 3 times, but look at all the nice variety that I'm getting here. Now I push that a little lighter, come over here, hit this with a light area. Okay, grab this color next to it, soften that transition with light pressure. Beautiful. Maybe we have a little reflected light here that's kind of a cool kind of a color. So with light pressure, just bring that in one stroke at a time. Grab that color now. Pull that in. Boom, boom, boom. And then we grab this color that we just created on top of it. And I'm just picking up the stylus with every new stroke so as to be sure that I get a little bit of variety every time I put the pen tip down. Okay? And that looks really, really yummy. I love it. It's great that you have this power to create a lot more natural looking effects, right, in your work, just with a couple of custom brushes and with the power of color dynamics. And that's sort of a core shadow that I'm trying to kind of lay in there, if you will. Okay. Make sure that color is really vibrant right up against that core shadow. There we go. All right, now basing on this reflected light here, I'm going to assume that I can grab a color that's a little darker right here and put that just next to the base of the orange there. And notice with greens, right, because of the way the greens work on the color wheel, right, if you look at in fact, you've got like not that much space to play with here, right? You're not going to see as much shift in those colors as you lay them down. So if you want a more intense effect, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to increase the color dynamics values. All right, if you want to bounce more into the yellows and blues as you're putting that color down, okay, for greens. For a color like orange, though, with the red on one side and the yellow on the other, and just the fact that you've got a lot more color to play with there, you don't need as intense a the settings. Okay, importante. And you know, here, of course, we can go ahead and we can add a little shadow there. Probably hear that nice scratch of my stylus there on the surface of the Cintiq. So you get the idea, you understand how this works. That's per stroke, but there's more that you can do than that. There's some even more exciting stuff you can do there, even more exciting, which I'm going to show you here in just a moment, and I think you're going to like this. And that's the ability to actually use the foreground and the background color together when you're painting with color dynamics. I know it sounds crazy, but it's really powerful, really amazing, really, really fun. So we're going to take a look at that here in just a moment. All right, we're just going to go up here. Add a little highlight there. And then go to the blue and just knock this in right here. And there you have a very so-so, but very painterly kind of orange ball painted with this one brush, okay? Now in the background, you know, if you want to have more fun, what do? You push up the hue jitter and the brightness jitter. And look, with each successive brush stroke, you get just enough variety to really add some good stuff in there. Look at that. It just brings it all to life, doesn't it? Right? You can have these areas kind of blend into one another, like so. And with the color dynamics, right, this really makes it sing. See what I mean by just sort of bringing things to life and making things have a bit more vibration, if you will, color vibration, right? Pretty exciting, pretty fun stuff right there. All right, I could get carried away painting this, and I don't want to. obviously needs a lot of work, but hopefully that communicates to you what's possible there. So using the same brush, all right, let's try this. Let's go ahead and turn the apply per tip back on, and now watch this. We're going to set our control for foreground and background jitter to pen pressure. What does that mean? Well, check this out. My foreground color, okay, I'm going to make a nice reddish color here like so. My background color, okay, and I can control that over here as well. My background color, I'm going to set to a very lemony kind of a yellow, like so. And we'll reduce this other stuff, hue and saturation and brightness. So what we have now is apply per tip is turned on, foreground, background, jitter, 0, but our control is set to pen pressure. Check this out. Heavy pressure, light pressure. Notice what happened? With the light pressure, what am I seeing? I'm seeing more of the yellow. With the heavy pressure, I'm getting more of the red. So in a single stroke, I can go from red to yellow. You notice that we have transfer settings here quite low. So if I increase the transfer settings and reduce the opacity jitter right here, okay, so that now the paint will not be as easily controlled by the pen pressure settings for opacity. What this means is I can get a nice yellow color right here, and I can move my way up gradually to that red color up at the top. Red down to yellow, like so. So now I have this capability which is pretty magical, and that is to be able to employ both colors together and mix any variety of them. And if I show you here what this means, I can do this. I can use medium pressure, okay, all the way throughout as I'm painting, and I can create basically an orange-ish sort of a color here on my canvas, okay? But it's got all this lovely activity happening between the red and the yellow, bouncing in between and everywhere, along the color wheel there, between one color and the other, everything that lies in that strip right there. And this is a pretty amazing thing. Now, of course, with this one brush, you're seeing one way of using it, right? But you can imagine how this could be great for all kinds of things. I mean, if you want to have a lot of fun, you can have a nice blue sky, and you can set your background color to be that same blue, and then set your foreground color to be white. Okay, so where am I going with this? Well, if I was going to paint some clouds, okay, I can just bear down to get the nice cloud shape there. And then as I let up, okay, towards the bottom, I can have it sort of fade more into that background, because now I'm using more of the blue. Okay, and then with light pressure towards the bottom here, I can just blend that all the way. And then I can hit the X key, and X is going to make blue my foreground color and white my background color. That reverses the one color and the other. And then I can go through and paint my sky this way. Okay, light pressure clouds, heavy pressure more sky, and everything in between. Okay? Harder edges, softer edges, depending on how much I sort of scrub away at it. Right? You get the idea, right? So to paint a really nice little sky here, I can just vary the pressure as I go. You can imagine how nice this would be if you combine it maybe with a smudge tool as well. You know, like doing some smudging here and there. softening some areas, pulling down into the sky. Etc., etc. So what a really fast and easy way to just start making some nice environmental stuff in the backdrop of your painting, right? Zoom in so you can see all that nice business going on there. You get the idea, I hope? All right, foreground, background color, playing together nicely. All right, what about for watercolor? Well, take a look at this. Go ahead and grab a brush that has a watercolory look to it inside of the Mega Pack, staying in the same paint box here. There's a brush down towards the bottom called Watercolor Fill right here. Now with this brush, okay, this is normally what it looks like. Makes a nice sort of a subtle watercolor kind of a look. But of course what we can do is use two colors at once. So we just go to the brush settings, we go to color dynamics, and we say turn on pen pressure to control, and we make our background color maybe a nice sort of violet color, something like this, or a foreground color. So that with heavy pressure I get the blue, and with lighter pressure I move more towards the violet, like so. All that with one stroke. Really, really pretty. All right, any questions? Gotta run? It's okay. Thanks for hanging out, Scott. Once edited, can brushes be used in Fresco or different brushes? Yes, Scott, they certainly can. You can import them in, just as Sam has answered that question. Thanks, Sam. That is correct. Photoshop brushes work in Fresco. Very cool. Right, so now we have some time to cover a couple other things I want to look at, and one of them, like I mentioned up top, is dual brush. Very quickly, dual brush allows you to take a brush stamp, and you know what those are now, and make it blend with the primary brush stamp in a number of different ways. You'll notice here that color burn is the blending mode that I have for the brush stamp in this case. We have not talked about blending modes yet with in this course. We will, but just so you know, different blending modes create a different appearance. Okay, when one stamp interacts with another, or when one layer interacts with another, and experimenting with different brush stamp shapes, with their spacing, how much they're scattered, and how many of them there are, as well as their blending mode, can give you a brush stroke that is less predictable and less repeatable, which is better for natural media emulation and for other kinds of special effects. So this is something we can cover a little later, but that's what dual brush is, and I want you to be aware of it. The other thing we didn't talk about is wet edge. Wet edge simply takes the interior of the brush stroke that you're creating and it reduces it in opacity by about 50%. And the outer edge, though, the border of the stroke that you're painting, remains at about 100%. Now with a brush like this, you cannot see the evidence of this, but if I were to use a simple brush, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. If I were to use a simple brush, such as just a basic hard round brush, okay, I just need a little circle, and I were to turn everything off here and just paint with it, and then turn on wet edges, you'll see what this looks like, okay? If I pass over that mark again, you'll notice that there's a 1 pixel area there that is at 100% opacity. Maybe you can see it like this a little more clearly. The interior is set to a lower opacity, which requires more brush strokes to get to 100%. And there are some uses for this that are quite interesting. So that explains that. Next category I want to talk about, and I mentioned this up top, is mixer brushes. Now, these are another advanced kind of brush in Photoshop, and they're really cool. The name probably gives it all away. They mix color on the canvas for you. So let's open up the Mega Pack here for a moment, and let's check out the Real Oils category. And this is where you're going to find some of these. I'm going to open up this bristly wet oil. All right, now, first I'll put some paint down. There we go. Great. Nothing too fancy at the moment, but watch this. We go ahead and grab another color and paint towards that blue. You will see that something there has happened, which is that it picks up some of the blue and mixes it into the stroke that you're painting. So mixer brushes allow you to mix paint on the surface. Not only that, but you have lots of controls up here at the top for how it mixes. Wetness, well, wetness, the higher the value of wetness, the easier it is to mix with what's on the surface. The mixing, which this may be confusing, but let me explain mixing. The mixing number tells you how much of the paint that's already on the canvas is going to get sucked up into the brush and affect the color that you have on the brush. If it's a very low value, okay, the color that you currently have on the brush will dominate. If it is a high value, like 100, the brush color, the color that is on your canvas will dominate. So I have yellow on my brush right now, but as I move in towards the blue, look how quickly, okay, I get stuck with just the blue and it dominates, and then I come back out again and I can pick up that yellow again. So as I pass through, blue dominates and then I'm back to yellow. Take that mixing down to a low value like 8 again and do the same thing, and look how much yellow gets pulled through. So that's how mixing works. Now with all these controls, okay, flow is how much of the paint is flowing out of the brush. Is it happening fast or slowly? Okay. With all these controls, you really can go to town making a very specific kind of effect you want for a brush that will mix on the canvas. But there are presets right here. Dry, light load, heavy load, moist, light mix, heavy mix, etc. These are really, really handy if you just want to use presets, because with all of these 12 options, you really have a lot to choose from and don't necessarily have to play around with any of these sliders, but of course you can. Now another very interesting thing about mixer brushes is this. Let's put some yellow down and we'll mix in some blue. Okay, there we go. And then just for kicks, we'll bring in a little pink right there, okay? Now, what I've got on the canvas is pink, blue, and yellow. Normally, if you hold down the Option key, which we've covered before, this is going to sample color, okay, from your document, right? Pink, blue, yellow, etc., and load it up on the brush. But with mixer brushes, see this option right here? Load solid colors only. Yellow, pink, blue. Okay, I'm holding down Option, tapping. Well, that's what you'd expect from a normal Photoshop brush. But here, if you take load solid colors only and uncheck it, the little check mark there, turn that off by tapping on it. So now it's gone. I can select this area, okay, right here. And I want you to look at this little color swatch up here. You'll see evidence of the pink, the blue, the yellow, all there together. When I paint with it, look what happens. Now we're getting into the good stuff. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate the comment about the brushes. Look at this. I'm painting with multiple colors on the brush at the same time. Pretty fantastic. Yes. So this is something you can only do with mixer brushes. Now, if you have Adobe Fresco, you can do this with multicolor brush swatches as well. And you can do them with any brush that you have loaded, which is pretty fantastic. All right, but here in Photoshop, this is how you do this. This is how you get multiple colors on your brush at the same time, and then you can paint with them. And don't forget that you can mix with them as well. So that means that if I have multiple colors and I put a little stroke of paint down, if I pull across like this, everything's going to get mixed together. Okay, so these colors here in the middle are basically eventually just going to turn into whatever color would be produced if you mix all these colors together, okay, into this sort of neutral color here. All right, pretty interesting. So, you know, if you want to, you can do things like this. Let's just do this. Let's go ahead and do a little rainbow. You can put some yellow, you can put some red, you can put some pinkish kind of a color here. Just go around the color wheel, okay, like so. Isn't this fun? and then right back where we started, right here. And I can select all this at once. Look at the size of my brush stamp. Now the way I select everything at once is I increase the size of my brush stamp so that it will cover this entire area. And you can see how much of the canvas you've selected right here. I don't have to make it quite that large, but I just want to make sure I cover everything. And there's my new brush. See that? Wow, that is pretty. I like it. Think about how nice it'd be to do some lettering with this, right? Mixer. Man, that's pretty nifty. All right. If you don't want things to mix, well, what do? You know the drill. Take the wetness down to 0, and automatically the mixing disappears. No mixing occurring now. Everything is just dry. Okay. So that's another kind of a clever way as well to build up paint and do a sort of impasto effect. If you go ahead and take the brush tip shape and make it something a little chunkier, like this shape right here, okay? And then go ahead and set your load solid colors only. Make sure that that's turned off, okay? And then we put some color down. Actually, let's go back to what we had on the canvas because I'll just select that. Here we go. And if I grab this color and paint with it now, okay, notice that I have no wetness, no mixing. So I can see every brush stroke as it's layered on top of the next. In order to get the kind of effect I want, what I would do is make a little chunky bit of paint here, okay? And then I can just open up my hue and saturation sliders, Command U, and I can colorize this swatch, okay? So I'm just gonna make it one specific color, like maybe this kind of bluish purple, like that. And then I select this, okay? Option key, select it. Now when I paint with it, okay, the color is really, really similar, right? But every single brush stroke, I can see evidence of one layering on top of the other on top of the other. So now if you take this to a point where you increase the texture, okay, by reducing the depth here, and all this is some advanced stuff, I just want to show you what it looks like. So don't worry if you don't understand how to do this, not a big deal. It's just for demonstration purposes here, okay? And then I make this even more subtle. So let's just put a bit of color down, slightly different bits and pieces there. Grab that. And then if I make a stroke, it's a bit more subtle now. You can see what that does. You can see each brush stroke layered on top of the next. Pretty nifty. If you add a bit of wetness and a bit of mixing, okay, all of that gets way more subtle. See that? Because it's going to be smudging that paint or blending that paint as it goes, right? So there's some pretty cool things you can do there with mixer brushes. All right, now the other thing about mixer brushes is because you can sample whatever's on the canvas, you can do weird stuff. You can do three-dimensional kind of looking painting. You can paint foliage really quickly, sample areas and paint with mixer brushes and do some nifty things like that. If you have a photograph of something, you can simply place that photograph on the canvas, sample some of it, and paint with it, okay? But let me show you an example of something strange you could do. I'm just going to make a circle here. And let's go and let's use a regular old brush, okay? Here in the paint box. We'll just grab the creamy brush again, our friend, creamy variation, either one. I'm going to lock layer transparency. Remember this trick? You can lock it here, or you can hit the slash, the backslash key, just underneath your question mark on the keyboard. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to paint a little shape, okay, like so. Very nice. And then we'll paint a little highlight right here. Okay, so there we go. We've got our little sort of sphere shape there. We'll go around the other side and paint a bit of a sort of reflected light with some purple there. That's kind of pretty right there. All right, now that we've got that shape, let's go back to our mixer brush, okay? Right here, mixer brush, there we go. And I'm just going to change the brush tip shape to a circle, all right? Nothing fancy. Let's go back to that circle we had earlier, there we go. Don't need any of these textures and all this other fancy business, okay? Here's my circle. Now watch this. I'm going to make my circle a little bigger for my brush stamp, and when I hold it down and sample this, I've just sampled a sphere. So look at that. Wow, that looks weird, huh? It's like you're painting a tube. Never knew you could do that, huh? Isn't that weird and fancy? So that's what's possible with a mixer brush, all right? To be able to do this sort of three-dimensional kind of painting with the brush. That's our sort of base shape, if you will, and I can use it to paint three-dimensional stuff like that. Very nifty. If you've never tried that, let me know. Sweet technique. Yeah, glad you like it. Glad you like it. Awesome. Alrighty, so there you go, folks. Color dynamics, mixer brushes. These are some of the more advanced things you can do. One more quick note about mixer brushes for you, and that is that there is another category of mixer brushes that some people are unaware of called erodible tips. Erodible tips. And if you jump on into the old mega pack again, okay, we just go right here to the drawing box and scroll down to the Tilterific pencils here, all right? We can just grab any of these. Tilterific 2015 is fine. What you're gonna see is that you have a brush that is a pencil that responds to pen tilt, okay, the tilt of the pencil, in a realistic way for shading. So if I draw with the pencil, okay, held upright, perpendicular to the surface, the canvas, right, I'm going to get a fine line. But if I angle it more so that it is parallel or closer to parallel to the drawing surface, just like using the side of the pencil to shade, you can do the same thing with your stylus with an erodible tip brush, like so, okay? And of course, it's going to respond to the direction I move and the angle of my wrist as I'm drawing to do all this lovely shading. If I increase the brush size to something like, say, 20 pixels, I can still get a fine line by holding it upright. Look at this. And even if I bear down with lots of pressure, it's only going to increase the density of the mark, but not the diameter. However, if I now go ahead and tilt, because the brush is larger, look how much more area I can shade with that same pencil, okay? So this is called erodible tips, and if you look at the brush settings for erodible tips, you're going to find that under brush tip shape, there are some different settings than normal. Softness is one of them, okay? The shape is a custom shape in this case, but you can go ahead and use a point, flat, round, square, triangle. Go ahead and try these things out, okay? And get different effects for erodible tip brushes. Another kind of hidden gem in Photoshop brush settings. Check it out. Well, gang, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned a lot. That wraps it up for the brushes section of this course. It's a two-parter, and thank you for joining me for that. If you have any questions, remember, if you're watching this later, go ahead and hit me up at Kyle T. Webster on Twitter, at Kyle T. Webster, okay? And that's where I'm going to be most responsive, and I can answer your questions about brushes any old time, whenever you like, all right? Thanks again, everybody. I hope you all take care, and remember to be kind, and I will say ciao for now.